This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
Random thought of the day. There's 16 games still remaining, mercifully, in this regular season. Presented by PointsBet Canada. It's the Tuesday edition of Leafs Morning Take. Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill with you. What's up, Rosie?
Not much, dude. A little Tuesday action going on. Twitter machines got me down for multiple reasons. Leafs are blowing leads like crazy. I don't know. What do you want me to say?
Not much. Just be you at the end of the day. Watching the game last night had me thinking, and I like to bring up different topics on this show. Had me thinking to your playing days. Do you remember a specific anthem singer, for better or for worse, for good or for bad, who you'll never forget, their rendition or an anthem that sticks out for you? Because last night you sort of felt for Natalie Morris. The mic malfunctioned like 3 times, and the crowd ended up singing the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah, there's always times where, I've seen people forget the words a couple times. This poor lady. I hope they have her back.
Oh, say can.
That's tough.
And then the crowd starts murmuring.
It just
Come on, Toronto.
It just had me thinking like somebody has that technical job where like your one duty is to make sure the microphones work. And I know life is life and things happen, but I thought the crowd did a good job of picking her up, man. That's a tough spot to be in.
Oh, totally. Well, what are you supposed to do? I mean, if you're not used to being in front of 20,000 people, I can imagine you just feel horrible, but good on Toronto for picking it up. I always like it. I don't think that happens in the States where they're going to pick up our anthem. I don't think it's as well known, but good, classy Canadians there pick up the American anthem and help her through that. I hope they have her back where she can come and kill it. Because that's
so Natalie actually does she does every home game, and
that's
it
right.
actually,
I've seen her lots before.
It brought back shades to me of Mark Donnelly, who used to do the Vancouver Canucks games a couple years back. He tripped on the carpet. Do you remember that game?
Dude, is it the lady who came out for Team Canada around like 2002 or something? Came out, forgot the words, walked back into the tunnel, regained her composure. They convinced her to come back out. She comes back out, slips on the carpet, falls hard on her butt and back and head, and then just gets up and just exits. I don't think I've ever felt worse for a human being than that display right there. I don't think there's a worse anthem story than that poor lady has right there. Way worse than the one last night.
It's got to be so nerve-wracking because you being the anthem singer and her being Natalie Morris last night, like, this is not on you. You were ready to go. You belted out the first couple words. You nailed it. And then you got to restart. But it was just one of those nights. I think the Scotiabank Arena faithful deserves a lot of credit. But again, do you remember a time or an anthem in your career that sticks out more than others, or everything was great when you were there?
I just remember when people are terrible at it and they are missing every word and they need like an earpiece and they can't hear themselves and they're off key or they shouldn't be there in general. And the guys on the bench are looking at each other and trying not to laugh and trying not to try to focus on the game. And this person is just squelching their way through the anthem. That happens lots, but hey, good on the people for getting out there in front of them and giving her a whirl, man. I'm always, however it goes, I just couldn't care less. It doesn't matter, man. Go out there and try it. If shit malfunctions or you don't hit it, who cares? Clap them off the ice anyways and give them a hand for trying.
Were you one of those anthem guys who are like swaying during the anthem, like really in it, maybe some tears coming out of your eyes? Like, are you thinking about like the hot dog you're getting after the game?
No tears. I usually just think about how cold and stiff I'm getting standing out there and trying to kind of keep moving a little bit is all. But I'm used to it. I've sat down for many, many minutes before and then had to go out there at 110. So if anyone's used to it, I think it's a guy like me.
No, to put it bluntly, I mean, you're the reason why the term grocery stick was created, right? Because you're the guy who separates a D and the forwards on the bench, and you did so for a long period of time in the NHL. So it is perfect. Like, your picture's in that dictionary, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes I'd mix it up and go sit over by the gate and chat the trainers up or the spare tendy, whatever. It depends what's going on that night.
No, you're a
Try to
social
sneak a
guy,
hot
man.
dog.
I can totally see you during the anthem, like sort of snickering if somebody's like messing up and it's like, you can notice it. Like you could be the guy like piping up. Everybody's like, "Hey, pipe down, Rosie." Like I can hear you chuckling a bit.
Well, this one time we were playing, and these kids, these tiny mites, Timbits, were coming flying out of the Zamboni gate, and of course, they have the red
Yeah.
carpet coming towards center, and there's about 50 of them, and they're just buzzing down the wall to do a hot lap, and they're going right towards this carpet, and we're going, no, 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 and they're just little Timbits, so when they crash, it's just
Yeah.
like a little ball rolls, and they're piling up, and then everyone just keeps coming, and everyone's just head down flying. And there was 10 of them, 15 of them, 20 of them just piling up on the other side of the carpet, and no one was noticing, and these kids just kept piling up. It was like a farcical comedy movie where it just never ended, and everyone on the bench, trainers, coaches, were crying in tears because these kids were piling up so hard at that before the anthem on the carpet. That's always a classic. Looks like Putin taking a spill out there.
Okay, fair comparison. Remember to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out, and don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. As you can see now, we're live on our very own YouTube page for the second time ever at the Leafs Nation 401. If you're watching or listening right now and are not subscribed to our YouTube page at the Leafs Nation 401, thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns, you can drop us a line down in the chat below here on YouTube, and we'll get to it a bit later on here in the show. But for now, let's get over the boards. So, no season sweep, Rosie. It was looking good for the first 25, 30 minutes of that game. And simply put, I thought the Leafs took their foot off the pedal and they ran into 41-year-old Craig Anderson, who is now, 13-3-1 in his last 18 starts against the Maple Leafs. This is his 20th NHL season, by the way. So he was in the league when you played.
Yeah, he definitely was. He was with Ottawa, I believe. And
Yeah.
it's funny. It's good to see him still out there. It's good to see guys that are older that you recognize. It makes you feel a little bit less old, to be honest. But I imagine cruising around that league, Craig Anderson feels plenty old himself. But good job last night.
Yeah. So what did you make of that game? Obviously, I think a lot of positives to grab. Number one, Austin Matthews, a goal and 2 helpers, a 3-game goal streak, 10 points in his last 7. Marner gets 2 apples in total, 3 games against Buffalo this season. He gets 9 assists. To me, I think that was a game they could quite frankly used a Luke Shen in their lineup, who was on a bird into Toronto on Monday, by the way, because I thought they were dominated in the blue paint in that game. Like Buffalo was on the doorstep and there was no response from the Leafs D.
Yeah, man, it was one of those classic games. Like after going up 2-0 that handily, it looked like it was going to be a 5-0 game in a big hurry. And the easy thing to do is take your foot off the gas, think this is going to be a little bit easier. And again, you're not physically, mentally saying to yourself, oh, you're not nudging your buddy beside you on the bench going, this is going to be easy. It's just, this is how the game is going. And then you start to loosen up and let off a little bit and maybe think that, you can try some things or whatever and kind of maybe veer off the game plan. And it so happens that at that exact same time, the other team is getting chewed out by their coach and they're saying, you need to kick it up a notch, and everyone's regrouping and throwing the kitchen sink at you. And then boom, they come at you with that wave and you're just not prepared to handle it. It's a classic story when you get up a couple goals. And unfortunately, the Sabres really figured their game out, kept the hammer down on them, and the Leafs didn't, weren't able to have an answer. They had some chances. They could have tied that game up easily. They could have prevented that 4th goal. They could have tied it up earlier in the 3rd. It could have been a different game, but it wasn't. And again, you need to learn to prevent that from happening, to recognize it from happening. It comes from the coaches down and the leadership to, create those bump up shifts when they start to gain momentum back from you. And it just happened. It was just textbook hockey there, where you get up a few goals and let off the gas and the other team puts the hammer down. But at the end of the day, you wonder how much these guys are focused on the points and the games right now, and how much they're just trying to find their identity and trying to work the lines around, obviously, and figure out some kind of chemistry amongst all these players. It seems like that's kind of the priority right now over other things, I guess.
We know social media is a cesspool, but like the overreaction to that loss, I thought was unbelievable to me because we all knew going into the last 20 games in the stretch run of the Stanley Cup playoffs, it really was trial and error, experimentation. You want to get your goalies cooking a bit, and Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. Like, to me, I didn't put much stock into the game. I thought there was a lot of actual positives to build from it. I know it stinks to lose to Buffalo, but you played them pretty well all season long. So you just move on. I know it's probably not the right approach in hockey, but knowing that this team has known their spot in the standings for like 2 months, they know who they're going to play. Obviously, still jockeying and battling for home ice advantage in that series against Tampa. I just move on, but I was a bit stunned how disappointed, how annoyed. The amount of bitching on social media after this game was incredible to me. Like, it's a meaningless game in mid-March against the Buffalo Sabres. Who cares?
Yeah, I've noticed a pattern of tension growing on Leafs Twitter of people starting to, you're getting close to that playoffs and some bad memories are coming floating in. And, the Toronto media is famous for piling on and making mountains out of molehills and making, a small problem into a big one amongst themselves. And this morning and last night was no different on Twitter. People are going, when is this going to end? And this is becoming unacceptable. And it's just like they just beat New Jersey and then handily beat Edmonton. Yeah. Like, you're acting like they're on a 4-game slide. And it's mountains out of molehills on that Twitter. And it is, I've mentioned at the beginning of the season, it is difficult to play in that market because this morning and after practice, when the media is in the room, they're going to be coming in, they're going to be throwing so much negativity and, the consensus is that this team's not ready and blah, blah, blah. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Was that the consensus after the New Jersey game? Was that the consensus after Saturday night against Edmonton? No, it's just mountains out of molehills, man. I mean, it's not good to lose that lead. Was it a good loss? No. Is the reason for it? Maybe. But again, keep things in perspective. I mean, the Leafs are having a hard enough time getting over this hump of the first round without having everyone bail on them at the drop of a hat. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the team. They've showed so many good things. Why not focus on the positive and give your team some support coming into the playoffs rather than making it more difficult on them? Because they hear that shit. They feel that stuff. You know that it's happening in the room, and it makes it harder to play. Give me another reason why they haven't won in Toronto. It's a difficult market to win in. I'm not blaming the fans or Twitter for their losses, but why not make it easier and support them rather than more difficult?
Dude, that building was a morgue last night, man. You can say what you want about the crowd singing the Star Spangled Banner. You played on this team. You played in that building. Sometimes I show up to Scotiabank Arena. I'm almost insulted to be somebody who has grown up a Leafs fan, man, because like you go to other buildings in this league, it doesn't sound like that, where it's like there was moments watching the game last night. Like I felt like I was watching my beer league game on Sunday afternoons because I didn't even notice anybody was there, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's just not meant for it. I mean, those platinum seats and those suits down in the bottom level, they go into their little box underneath there, and they have drinks and appetizers, and they're bullshitting with their business folks and whatever, and they never make it back to their seats for the puck drop. So the barn looks empty, the beginning of every period, and it's made for concerts and stuff. It's not supposed to be echoing through the rafters like it is at an older building. And yeah, it is kind of famous for being a little bit quiet. When you're watching on TV and you can hear every skate edge cut and every guy call for the pass and every stick tap on the ice, it's not a great sign. And I mean, it's if you could actually fill that with the most diehard fans in Toronto, that place would have the roof lifted off of it. But unfortunately, with the price point and the cost of living and with everything being so outrageously expensive, there's only a certain group of people that can afford to have tickets and go to those games. And they're not the people that are taking their shirt off and painting their faces and screaming and yelling, that's for sure.
They have those next gen games. I would like them to have games where it's like super fan games where we're only going to have people in the building who have paint on their faces, a jersey on, and that's it. And that's all. Like, I would really like to hear that building at its loudest. And I will say in the Stanley Cup playoffs, it gets loud. I'm still convinced they pump in crowd noise, but that's a story for another day. We see that in other sports and professional wrestling. It is a thing. But I would love to see the super fans in that building actually cheering their favorite team as opposed to the suits, man. Like, I watch some of these games. I go to some of these games, and I'm like, I can't believe this is the same league that, dare I say, the Montreal Canadiens playing in the Bell Center, Bridgestone Arena in Nashville is really loud. Philadelphia, Vegas. Like, I've been to all these barns, and it's like night and day to watching a game at Scotiabank Arena. It's crazy to me, man. But anyways, I digress. Matt Murray was a big topic of conversation. I don't know why. I don't know what he was supposed to do. There were pretty much 4 tap-ins in the game in that 4-3 loss to Buffalo. But numbers are numbers, I guess. The third straight game surrenders 4 goals. He's now surrendered 4 goals in 5 straight appearances. But what have you made of Matt Murray since coming back from the injury list?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of vanilla, right? He's played just fine.
Yeah.
He's not lost a game. He hasn't had any big blunders. He hasn't looked terrible at any point in time. Looks a little scrambly and stiff, but I mean, he probably isn't in his groove right now. He's been out for quite a while. I just think it's his 3rd game back, so understandable. And again, I do not put the loss on Matt Murray at all. It was the players in front of him that let him down. Would it be nice if he stood on his absolute head and stole the game despite the misgivings in front of him? Yes. Did he do that? No. The numbers don't look awesome, but again, numbers don't always tell the pure truth. I think he's been just fine. He hasn't done enough to go steal a game, but he certainly hasn't done enough to lose one either. He was just solid. He just played goalie, and they let him down. And like you say, the goals that they scored were kind of tap-ins that weren't on him. There was breakdowns much further in front of him. So that's the way she goes.
We talked about this last week, but I'm always intrigued by Sheldon Keefe, what he has to say. And that was like pretty much the first question. What have you thought of Matt Murray in his 3 games since returning? He thinks he's been great. So that's all you need to hear. That he thinks Matt Murray's been great. And to me, watching that post game, I'm like, there's no way in hell Ilya Samsonov is starting the first game of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I know we flip-flop back and forth, man, but they have so much faith in Matt Murray. And you want to know why? Because he won 2 Stanley Cups 30 years ago.
My thing is, no one in that room knows who's starting the Stanley Cup playoffs. Keefe doesn't. Dubas doesn't. Shanahan doesn't.
You don't think so?
JT doesn't. Murray doesn't. Samsonov doesn't. They don't know. They're going to go with the hot hand. If some guy's on a if Murray shits the bed his last 2 starts before the playoffs and Murray's a hot hand, they're not going to put Murray in. They're going to put Sammy in. They're going to put whoever's hot in. I truly believe they don't know who's going to start. They've said from the beginning this is a 1-2 punch. They've been doing that all year long, and they're trying to get Murray starts here and get him back to feeling like he's involved and he's in a groove and find his way and find his game and get hot. So they're going to play him. Doesn't mean they're starting him. They're going to start. I'm not saying they're not. I just say they don't know yet. They're going to, it's still weeks away. They got 16 games left. Lots can happen. And they're going to go with the hot hand at the moment.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, but there's just a sense for me of like the I told you so. Hey, you guys didn't believe me. I picked up Matt Murray. This guy's done it for me in the past. He's going to do it for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I guess we'll see over the next month who trends in that direction. But if I had to put money on it right now, assuming he's healthy, again, that's the big word there, assuming he is healthy and ready for game 1, my opinion is that it's going to be Matt Murray. So there seems to be all this consternation for some reason, and I tweeted this yesterday. The Tampa Bay Lightning have been doing this for like 7-8 years. The 11 forwards, 7D look. It's been a thing for a long time. 7-Eleven, if you want to call it, the convenience store outlook, whatever it is. They've been, deploying this for a long period of time. Why is everybody making so much of a big deal about this, especially when Toronto has 9 defensemen on their roster, Rosie?
Yeah, one of the big things I noticed when getting involved in this job and getting deeper into the day-to-day of the Leafs is how obsessed everyone is with the lineup changes and who's playing with who. It's just like, it's such a topic of concern. Mark Masters is just waiting there at pregame skate with his phone ready because everyone's going to be checking because they all want to know. And I don't really get it. When you're in a locker room and they mix the lines up, it's like, dude, you're a professional. You've played on dozens of teams in your career. You've played with hundreds of different players. And if a coach mixes up a line, it's not earth-shattering news to anyone in the locker room. You go and you say, hey, bud, we're playing together tonight. Let's go. And you know how you like to go down low and then hit I'm going to be coming through right there. So watch me on that play. And you're going to chit-chat when you're having lunch and away you go. It's not a huge deal. People are going bananas about it. That being said, I don't like 11-7. I don't think many guys do. I've played professional level as a defenseman. I've played as a forward, and both positions it sucks. When you got 11 forwards, you can't roll the lines. You're always yanking a guy, a centerman usually off a different line to play with those two guys on the fourth line and jump in there. And that usually affects those two guys because when the going gets tough and, minutes are getting up there, it's hard to grab a guy and shove him on that line to take a twirl. And then if you don't do that for a while, then it's harder and harder to go back to those guys because they've been sitting there a while, so they can get screwed and it can mess up those lines. Then with the defenseman, you're always playing with a different guy, and it's hard to, you're always looking over your shoulder going, who's out with me again? You get into a bad spot and you're going D to D. What hand is that guy again? Am I hitting him on the low side or the high side? I can't remember, and you got to have an instant second on who's out there with you. And if a guy just changed or what, you're out there with a different guy every single shift, essentially. And I've talked to guys that do that. Tampa's done it, but when Tampa did it, it was like clockwork when you're going out there. You didn't miss a beat. And if you're going to roll, especially the 7D, it has to be consistent. You have to get those guys in a groove, get the sweat on, and get them kind of involved in the game where you get that. I always notice I was getting a full sweat on. You're wet, you're soaked, you're hot, and you're ready to play out there. You're loose and you're limber because it's like clockwork. You're going out there every such shift like clockwork, and you can rely on that and expect it, where when you're jumping around and this guy take a seat and this guy again and double shift that guy, it's all over the place. It's difficult. I don't like it. I think he's just trying to get the personnel in order right now, and we'll see. I have no idea if he's going to use it in the playoffs. He seems pretty headstrong about it right now.
Interested in getting your opinion on this take. Andrew in the chat, move Riley to left wing, 7-11 solved. What's your level of capacity? You laugh about that, but Brent Burns back in the day, I think, is the perfect example. I obviously think it's too late in the season to experiment with something like that, but it's not like Sheldon Keefe hasn't tried everything and then some in the last 2 weeks, and he's getting knocked for it, by the way, which I don't understand. Like, they know their playoff positioning, they know they're playing Tampa, they're still jockeying for home ice, but like, would you ever get to that level where you just try things out for a couple of shifts? Morgan Riley at wing.
I don't think in this position you got a good team that's, ranked to be one of the top handful in the NHL, and you're going to go make a move like that. If you wanted to try it in October or November, yeah, sure, go ahead, talk to Morgan about
Mitch
it.
Marner on D. What's the difference?
Well, I was just going to say, why don't you throw Marner back on
Tell
D?
me.
It's a little bit more believable to put Morgan Riley up on left wing, to be honest with you. That transition works better than a forward going D. I mean, you got guys in the NHL coming down on a guy that's not great at skating backwards. I know there's defensemen that can skate faster backwards than they can forwards, if you can believe that. Those guys are playing in the NHL for a reason. A forward who hardly ever skates backwards unless he has to playing D is just, it's a much, much tougher position to play defense than it is to forward. And you throw Riley up there, fuck, I don't know. Has he ever played that? Have they ever thought of that? I don't know, man. It would be interesting, but I didn't like Riley last night. He's constantly not holding the puck on the line. And then with like how many seconds left, it looked like my U11 team where they just look at the puck and it's within stick distance. He was coming down just over the blue line. Puck was there to grab and transition it up to somebody to get into the offensive zone. He just kind of looked at it and waited for the guy to skate on it. I don't know if he was gassed or what, but that was a really bad look. I saw someone tweet about it too, saying, I was glad I was the only one that didn't notice that. And he's just not stepping up for a guy of his caliber. I would just love him to have some confidence and just take control out there. And he just always seems to be a step behind scrambling rather than in complete control.
I'm just thinking, for a team that likes to think outside the box, and again, for a team who was heavily considering, maybe they weren't, Mitch Marner playing D more than usual. I know he had some spins earlier in the season, didn't work out. I actually think it makes more sense for a defenseman to move up front. And you're a guy who played both positions, I believe, in the NHL and pro in general. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen in Toronto, and Morgan Riley defensively has been a work in progress, we'll call it. But like, I would never say never. I'm not going to say it's going to happen now, but for a team that likes to think outside the box, I actually don't think it's the most outlandish idea. That's sort of why I brought it up.
I don't mind it in theory, but if you put it into practice, the shitstorm that would happen with the media and the Toronto and the Twitter and everything, it would be such a disaster. It would be such a distraction that I don't even think it would be worth trying.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. I just had to bring the conversation up. Appreciate Andrew for chiming in here on the chat. Andrew also writes in, Rosehill played both wing and D, so he's studied up on Jay Rosehill for sure. Atlantic Division Roundup. Let's look now at the division. We like to do this once a week. Of course, Tampa Bay Lightning. Weird schedule. The Lightning play the Devils 3 different times over the course of 7 days this week, which I think is good news for the Leafs. We saw the Devils back last week. Really damn good team. But you look at the standings right there. The Leafs have a bit of separation, and they still have that game in hand on Tampa in the standings. But it looks like it could come down right to the wire to see who has home ice in the first round between the Leafs and the Lightning here, Rosie.
Yeah, it could. I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a war going down back and forth, point for point, but Tampa's kind of slid a little bit in the last couple of weeks, and they got a pretty tough schedule coming up. If you look ahead, the second last game of the year, Toronto and Tampa are playing each other, and I mean that's going to be it'll be interesting to see if that's a playoff preview or if it's a throwaway game with guys resting up or whatever else they do with it. But they are going to see each other right before the playoffs. That'll be an interesting one, and keep an eye on these standings and these points to see if that game's going to matter much or not. It's looking right now like the Leafs are fairly comfortable, assuming they keep getting some points. But I don't imagine Tampa's too happy with their play in the last couple of weeks, and I imagine they'll start to crank it up before playoffs.
Yeah, defensively, they've been a train wreck, namely Andrei Vasilevsky, who obviously is going to be the biggest storyline for me heading into that first round series with Tampa, considering everything around Toronto's goalie situation. Vasilevsky, for my money, when he's on, the best goaltender on the planet, and obviously will be a wild card and X factor moving forward in that series. And again, you just look at that Boston record, you're like, my goodness, they are so good. But anyways, let's take a look now at the PointsBet wrap-up and what you have to say here in the chat. Many thanks to producer Alex for putting up a poll. Who would people start for game one against the Tampa Bay Lightning? And right now, 75% in favor of Ilya Samsonov, 25% in favor of Matt Murray for game one of that series.
I would have to agree, man. I like Sammy the best this year. He seems to be more poised. He seems to be bigger, and his positionally, he seems to be more sound. He seems to be more limber and athletic and capable of making that desperation second save. He's just played better for this team. So I think they're going to go with him in the playoffs. I think they should. And then I think they got, if you need to pull him or not even pull him, just start with somebody else after a loss. You got a guy with tons of experience, and hopefully he's healthy enough and in a mindset where he can go in there and be poised as well. And I think we've talked about using more than one goalie in a series, and that doesn't even mean someone's going to get hurt or someone's going to have an atrocious game. You just might throw it back to a different goaltender and keep them both in the mix. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be the big story, I think, especially at the beginning of playoffs, is the goaltending situation and who they roll with, because all year long we know they haven't had a defined number one, and they still don't, and I don't think they plan on having a definitive number one.
Yeah, I think to your point, Samsonov, again, is the guy I would like to see, considering his splits on home ice, assuming they get home ice advantage in the first round. But I think we should do a friendly wager, put a beer on who starts game one. I'll go with Maria. You go with Samsonov. Does that work?
Done and done.
I would love to see Joseph Wall start the first game. Kerwin writes in, morning, fellas. What a mixed emotion game last night. Loved the first by Toronto. Didn't like the second, but we outscored them. That awful third, and of course, Willie gives us hope with a minute left. Yeah, they scored 6 on 5, which is great to see. PS17 writes in, Shen is back. Will they go with 8D and 10 forwards? So you may laugh and say, hey, Morgan Riley at forward. Anything is possible with this team, and I just can't believe how much conversation has been brewed around the 11-7 format and configuration they've been running. The Islanders have done that in the past. So have the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I don't read that much into it. I do think it's trial and error type of season, and I also wonder where in the fuck Connor Timmins is, man. He hasn't played since February 24th, and sometimes I watch guys like Liljegren out there. I know Liljegren's a better player overall, but what did Timmins do not to be in the lineup is my question.
Yeah, he's just a victim of circumstance. Sometimes that happens where, I'm sure they're talking to him saying, hey, stay positive. You're a big part. You're going to be involved down the stretch. Be ready. Don't get down on yourself. All that standard shit they're going to be telling a guy who's kind of getting screwed by circumstance. And, there's no one knows what's up the future holds. Guys could get hurt. And, we got lots of legit D here, but, he could get thrown back in the mix. I think a guy like Liljegren, who's had a pretty good season and shown that he can play and be an asset, has kind of gotten, potentially going to be thrown on the back burner here when Schenner gets back. We'll see. My thing is, will Justin Holl's staple into this lineup be continued when Schenner gets back? The only thing I can think of when they would just refuse to take this man out of the lineup is they like a big body. They like a defensively sound guy who can maybe finish a check here and there. I guess if you want to call it that. But could he be replaced by Shen or not? Or how high does this stranglehold on the coaching staff that Justin Holl has? How high does it go? Will he stay in even when Shenner comes back? Well, I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah, we'll have this conversation as we get closer to game one. Like, who's the ideal 6, assuming they go at 6 and not 7 for the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, anything is possible with this brain trust, of course. And I think ideally right now there's 4 defensemen I have in there for game one. The other 2 still up for debate. I think Shen could be obviously in that conversation to have the go-ahead with the pedigree and the resume and the 2 Stanley Cups and the physical presence. I think he's in there. But we'll have that conversation maybe next week. Just to wrap, PS17 also writes, Liljegren was -3 with 3 different D partners last night, which is never great to see. And I know Leafs Twitter, the analytics community, was up in arms last week when Liljegren sat for a couple games. So I don't know how they're feeling now, maybe a bit differently, but they don't seem to want to bring up that conversation when Liljegren has a bad game. But I digress. Last but not least, I know you wanted to issue an apology on today's show.
Oh, kind of. So yesterday's show, when I was talking about Reeves fighting, I said something to the effect of there's not many guys in this league who can square up and go toe-to-toe with a Mongoloid like Reeves. I've always used that term as in a big, strong beast of a guy who's big, strong, intimidating dude. It was brought to my attention on Twitter that term didn't originate with this, but has in the past been derogatory towards people with Down syndrome. Now, if you use any rationale or logical thinking whatsoever, I think it's easy to see I wasn't using it in that way. Why on earth would I use that term with no history of bigotry and just awful, awful human beingness, use that in a public forum in that way? Someone on Twitter decided to throw that away and demanded my apology and tagged the Special Olympics, tagged the NHL, tagged Minnesota Wild, tagged some other outfit I wasn't really familiar with, just tried so hard to attack me. And I engaged with him and I said, do you not see that this is an innocent mistake, an honest mistake? Wouldn't it be more understandable to reach out to me and say, hey, Jay, I can tell that you might not know the derivative of this word being derogatory towards these people. Just so you know, this is how it can be taken out of context. I would have said, my God, I had no idea. I've used that my whole life and never come across that. I will now remove that from my vocabulary. Pretty standard things. And if you consider yourself a progressive and kind person who's out to do good in the world, attacking people on Twitter, not using common sense or rationality, and not giving a person the benefit of the doubt and assuming that they are slandering people with special needs in a public forum. Like, what world do you live in where you just don't give that person the benefit of the doubt? It's just shocking to me. And this is probably old news for people on Twitter, but it's my first run-in with this kind of thing. And I was just shocked at the thinking behind this person. And it wasn't about the word, or it wasn't about the potential hurt that it could cause. It was about the person and licking their lips at the chance to attack somebody and attack hard. And I think I learned my lesson from engaging. And I personally wrote Revo a message that said, hey, I use this word. I don't know what your background is with the word, but I had no idea it meant that. And I apologize. And I have a cousin who's 50 years old and lives in the same town as me. He has Down syndrome. I've known him my entire life. I go bowling with him. He kicks my ass, to be honest with you. And he's just always been a positive, special person in my life. And like, people just don't think of that. They just want to attack me because I used a word that apparently a couple hundred years ago meant something different. So again, no offense to anyone. I apologize for using that word. And if you consider yourself a kind, progressive person who wants to do good in the world, maybe try to actually do that in the world instead of being a negative menace who just wants to bring people down and get them in trouble and point and have power over them in that way. It's pretty toxic. And I think there's a way to go about those things. And I appreciate if I ever cross the line or mess something up, send me a message and say, hey, Jay, this is actually what this means. And I promise you, I will do my best to do the right thing on it. But that's my only gripe so far with Twitter. It's a world out there where that stuff happens. And I think I need to learn to accept it and just try to do better.
It's a world. It is a world. That's for sure. Very well said. Good stuff. So we'll leave it at that for today's show. Rosie, you're not going to be with us tomorrow. Three Hits with Rosie makes its triumphant return. It's been a couple weeks.
Yeah, maybe I should have saved a rant like that for 3 hits, but we'll find something to go off about.
No, it's good. It's good that you just backed it up and spoke up about it, and we nipped that in the bud right away because I think you're bang on with the breakdown there. So we'll leave it at that. Again, the Avs are venturing into town. I believe they're already into town, and that should be a fantastic game between the Leafs and the Colorado Avalanche, who won the Stanley Cup last year. So I'll preview that. Jay will have his 3 hits with Rosie, potentially get a guest on tomorrow as well. So, Rosie, we'll talk on Thursday. Okay, buddy?
Cool. Right on. We will see you then.
The one and only Jay Rosehill. Many thanks to producer Alex as well. I'm Nick Alberga. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Take care.